This is Thought in Motion, a series dedicated to the seminars of psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. Today's video is part 2 of our examination of lectures 22 and 23 in Seminar 3. If you've not already watched the first part, I do encourage you to do it before watching this video, as we'll be diving into some very specific and technical considerations found within these two lectures. So with that in mind, as mentioned in my previous video, it may also help to look through lectures 22 and 23 before watching this video if you do happen to have Seminar 3 on hand. And finally, I want to encourage those who've read these lectures carefully to raise questions concerning any of the interpretations I make here. I'll present what the text says to the best of my ability, but most of my interpretations will be held tentatively, given the unique difficulties presented here in understanding Lacan. So with all that out of the way, let's get to lecture 22, which Lacan begins by quoting one of his mentors, who in turn is quoting a patient. The patient states, "I'm much more myself. Before I was a para-me who thought of myself as the true one, and who was absolutely false." A few things to notice already. It is a very oddly constructed sentence made by an individual with psychosis. Next, notice how there is a transition from the first person, "I was a para-me who thought myself as the true one," to the third person, who was absolutely false. The consistency or change in verb tenses will be very important throughout these analyses. Lacan then provides a second example, this time a set of contrasting sentences. The first sentence is, "I am the woman who will not abandon you." In the French, it's "Je suis la femme qui ne vous abandonnerai pas." And the second sentence is, "I am the woman who shall not abandon you. Je suis la femme qui ne vous abandonnera pas." To the English listening ear, the will not and shall not probably don't have quite the contrasting meaning. So let's look at the French conjugation of abandonner. The first sentence conjugates it in the first person future tense. So the first sentence reads, "I am the woman and I will not abandon you." The second conjugation is in the third person future tense, and so reads, "I am the woman and she shall not abandon you." Or perhaps, "I am the woman, the one who shall not abandon you." The key to pay attention to here is how the use of the third person conjugation of the verb functions as a kind of depersonalization of the sentence's subject. What is at stake then is whether the initial personalization in the primary clause carries over to the relative clause. And what is the primary reason why it does or does not? That's the question that we'll need to get answered today. Lacan will then move into a discussion of the big other. And to give away the punchline, the big other as the locus or center of language is to be considered the speaker of the sentence in most of the examples provided, though admittedly it's not clear in every case. In general, the big other is always behind the concrete discourse and beyond the imaginary relations that mark the ordinary way most of us think of communication. So in our ordinary understanding of communication, there's a speaker and a listener, and both are sort of equals in a two-way conversation. Such a conception of intersubjective communication is found in Martin Buber's notion of the I-thou, which Lacan explicitly criticizes here. In case you're not familiar with his thought, Martin Buber was a philosopher, often associated with a form of religious existentialism, and who's best known for his contrast between the objectifying and utilitarian relation to others in the modality of the I-it, with a symmetrical two-way relationship with the other, whereby one subjectivity meets another subjectivity in a kind of authentic mode of mutual coexistence, the I-thou. This portrayal of intersubjectivity for Lacan resonates with the imaginary relationship between egos. Such an approach covers over the fact that the other, the thou of the I-thou, is a mirror image of myself, and disregards the hierarchical dimension that comes with the inclusion of the big other. The big other, as the locus of speech, structures that relationship between myself and the other so as to establish a proper distance, allowing the I and the you to relate in their individuated and distinct manners. So we might say that there cannot be a harmonious I-thou relation without a desymmetric relation with the radical otherness or alterity of the big other. Now, Lacan does say that the big other is the I of the discourse itself, but this I is not necessarily equivalent to the appearance of the signifier I in the sentence. It's the unspoken I in the sentence, "You are the one who will follow me." So who then is the you of the sentence? To answer that question, we have to distinguish between what Lacan calls the you in general and the full you. The full you is expressed in a sentence like, "You are my master, tu es mon maître." I always thought this was the utterance of the unconscious subject, and in that case, the you here is the big other. Perhaps it is a response to a preceding command delivered by the big other of, "You are my slave." Lacan provides the example of the Ave Maria, which in English is rendered Hail Mary, which are the words spoken by the angel who then says to Mary, "You will have a son without a husband." Mary's response is, "I am the maidservant of the Lord, that it be done unto me according to your word." Lacan interprets this as, I am the maidservant, as meaning I'm abolishing myself. What am I if I am she who you say I am? Such a response by Mary might be in the same category as, "You are my master," which could be perhaps reformulated in the question, what does it mean to be your slave? But I think what's important is how many of the sentences are here not directed at the big other, but are directed at the unconscious subject. And the you here, which is not an expression of full speech, that is, speech directed at the big other, is a question of whether the subject identifies with this you or not. And whether that happens or not has radical implications for how the addressed subject will respond. Now, another part that gets confusing is when it is depersonalized, this you comes to represent the superego. Just to briefly define this term, the superego is like the law, but one without dialectic. Lacan identifies it here with Kant's categorical imperative, which in the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals is formulated as, act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Lacan characterizes this law as having a maleficent neutrality, which is what Lacan is attributing to this depersonalized you that is the superego. So this superego is an observer that sees everything, hears everything, notes everything, and that is this same remorseless, incessant you that provoked Schreber into his distinct responses. Now, up to this point in my examination of the seminars, I've mostly conceptualized the superego as operating in the position of the big other. Yet if that was the case, then how would it be that the unspoken I that utters the sentence, "You are the one who will follow me," is the big other when the superego is operating in the position of the you? It wouldn't make sense for the speaker and the addressee to be in the same position. But the way I'm making sense of this is as follows. Ordinarily, the superego does operate in the position of the big other. But remember, in psychosis, the signifier representing the big other is not functioning for the subject, and what was initially behind the scenes, the hidden I of the sentence, now makes its over appearance in the depersonalized you. Lacan again evokes Kant here, who is well known for having written that the only fixed reality, the only reality that is not subject to doubt, is the starry skies above and the voice of conscience within. I think this line by Kant is evoked because in psychosis, these two fixed realities represent not only the certainty associated with psychosis, but also how in psychosis we have two certainties that also become mixed up, such that the fixed reality of the voice of conscience no longer remains within the subject, but is uttered from the fixed reality of the starry skies above. Lacan adds that the feeling of foreignness attributed to this superego is always encountered through the ego, and it is the ego who becomes this you. Now, this confused the hell out of me as well, because we just got done saying that the depersonalized you was the superego, and now Lacan is telling us that it's the ego. But I think it gets less confusing if we remember that in psychosis, the big other is collapsed into the little other. So the depersonalized you, that is the superego, makes its appearance in that ego who becomes other to itself. Lacan then asks about what the difference is between thou art the one who wilt follow me everywhere, tu es celui qui me suivra partout, and thou art the one who will follow me everywhere, tu es celui qui me suivra partout. Once again, we are presented with two similar sentences, distinguished by the tense of the verb, one of which is in the second person and the other that's in the third person. And this time, the two sentences are phonetically exactly the same. You pronounce them exactly the same. Lacan says here that the who, the qui, is what Lacan calls the screen or filter that may or may not allow the thou, the tu, from the principal clause to pass into the relative clause. The permeability of this screen depends on the sense of the signifier to follow then, suivre, and the sense of the me in the sentence, le moi. In the first sentence, thou art the one who wilt follow me everywhere. It's like the declaration of the angel to Mary, a kind of command and transference of power. In contrast, the second sentence, thou art the one who will follow me everywhere, is a somewhat detached observation or description rather than an injunction. Indeed, it may be a kind of statement of resignation, like when I say that my past will follow me wherever I go. And in this sense, to follow almost takes on a kind of persecutory character. Lacan insists that the differences between these two sentences is not a matter of meaning, but concerns the level of the signifier. In other words, it's not a matter of who will do the following, but rather the signifier to follow itself. The meaning remains open when it is spoken in the personal form of the verb, suivre, which allows one to ask, what is one being asked to follow? A message, a word, a person, a group? The meaning is in doubt, which is what puts us at the level of the signifier. And so the verb to follow, it operates like a knot that binds together several different possible meanings. But those subjects that have not acquired the knot will hear wilt follow as will follow. This changes the meaning of the thou in the sentence, since it no longer remains open but closes down meaning to become a matter of fact and certainty. And so the way one interprets the sentence, whether or not the subject in the primary clause agrees or disagrees with the verb in the relative clause, depends upon whether I have assumed the quilting point, that my relation to discourse as a whole is structured by a signifier. That relationship to the signifier is a point at which one's identity is, to a certain extent, tethered to certain meanings, and that it is subject to being questioned. So Lacan, somewhat helpfully, returns to Schema L here to think through the implications of this. He states that in the sentence, thou art the one who wilt follow me, the thou is located at the level of the big other, which is very confusing because I thought the thou in this sentence referred to the addressee who was other than the big other. I think the confusion sets in, at least I'm hoping I'm getting this right, because to say the thou is located at the level of the big other is not to say that the thou is identified with the big other, but only to say that the thou is fundamentally tethered to and supported by the big other. I may identify with the thou, but only to the degree that the thou is supported by a prior internalization of a fundamental signifier that pertains to my relationship to the big other. Lacan then adds that the wilt follow operates at the level of the subject, which I'm not completely clear on as to why that is the case, except that to the degree the subject is a constellation of signifiers dictated by the big other, the verb to follow here is the signifier that establishes a kind of position. If you command me to follow, then I become the follower. The who, me, is at the level of the little other, which makes sense insofar as the I of the sentence is unspoken, but not the me. the one who I think I'm being asked to follow. The subject who utters the sentence is the big other, whereas the me is the grammatical object of the verb. Lacan returns to our sentence, "Thou art the one who wilt or will follow me." Now, another observation to make here is that the S that would be silent to the listener and thus can only be placed there by the listener and not the speaker. So it's the thou that determines whether there's an S there and thus determines the significance of the sentence. Lacan indicates that the one who stands behind this thou is the ego, whereas the speaker addresses this thou from the place of the big other. It's the ego then that decides between the two forms of the sentence. And so long as the ego is oriented in the place of this thou, it will be the case that the sentence will remain personalized. But what allows for the listener to go one direction or the other when interpreting the sentence? It is in larger part the relationship that the listener has with the speaker. Lacan illustrates this example with drawing upon the Judeo-Christian tradition, which commonly conceives of subjects as being called or summoned by the I, as in the one who says, "I am the one who am," which is expressed by God in the burning bush to Moses. It is this I that sustains the thou. This God of the Judeo-Christian tradition is not an abstract, immutable principle, but another subject who calls through the word and who brings into being other subjects through that word. It's a relationship to another subject, but to an elusive one, an elusive I of the other, since the God of the I am, the one who am, remains a hidden God who must reveal itself rather than be ascertained through reason, and who, in revealing itself, still remains hidden. Lacan even goes so far as to say that a simple appeal to internal experience reveals how we are by far no way a unified subject. Without the big other to sustain us, we fall apart. And without the fundamental signifier, there is inside of us what he calls a veritable pandemonium. I want to thank the following for supporting this channel on Patreon. If you wish to support this work on Patreon, the link is below in the description. You can also support this work by liking and sharing this video and subscribing to my channel. If you have questions about specific aspects of the text that either I did or did not cover, feel free to leave a comment or a question down below and I'll do my best to address it, or at least hopefully we can learn together a little bit more about what is being said here. So as always, thank you for watching, and until next time, be well.